Two wild and crazy brothers, Joe and Danny, were out in the wilderness on the hunt for animals during their free time. After their wild escapade, Joe had a chit-chat with Danny about their troublemaker brother Roy. Joe wasn't exactly doing the happy dance about Roy's behavior because he was like a walking tornado of problems, often doing the che-che with trouble and taking pit stops in jail. Roy had a reputation for being a one-man action movie with his gig as a freestyle fighter. Despite this, Danny was sticking to his belief that Roy had some hidden hero vibes and might pull a complete 180 someday. And then, it's showtime for Roy. He's all suited up for a brawl in the arena. Unlike his rule-following siblings, Roy was basically a carefree unicorn. Picture this, just 5 minutes before his face-off, he's giving his girlfriend, Lisa, some lovey-dovey attention, even though the crowd was sitting there twiddling their thumbs. As per the usual script, Roy, a former action hero in the Special Forces, sent his opponent packing with a one-way ticket to Knockoutville. But hold on to your popcorn, because the twisty roller coaster of surprises is here his opponent wasn't exactly down for the count. Since the rulebook was apparently on vacation, the opponent got up and did a plot twist, leaving everyone scratching their heads. Oh boy, Mr. Big Shot Roy's boss, Julian, was about as thrilled as a cat in a bath. He ordered his crew to slap the cuffs on Roy and do some tough love punishment. Julian, who thought he was the undefeated champion of life, claimed he hadn't taken a loss in ages. He had this genius theory that Roy's recent performance nositive was all thanks to his girlfriend's shenanigans, so he decided to whip up a punishment soft. Later, Julian took Roy on a little field trip to what turned out to be a diamond-studded storage unit. Yup, he had diamonds stashed away like a squirrel with a nut collection. Julian gave Roy a golden, or rather diamond, ticket to transport these sparkly treasures to spots A and B. If Roy succeeded, he'd be rolling in some big bucks. Roy scratched his head like a confused cat at a magic show, wondering why Julian was picking him instead of his army of armed buddies. Julian spilled the tea. Roy's got mad driving skills, plus his soldier bros might lend a hand, and Julian wanted to do a damage control dance after Roy's previous mess. Julian even threw in a not-so-subtle threat to make it a full house harm the family if Roy didn't do the diamond che-che. In a state of wait, what? Roy gave his brother Joe a ring for some wisdom. However, Joe was still angry, so he ignored Roy's call. The next day, Danny, an active soldier, was puzzled because he couldn't reach his brother. His solution? He decided to visit Joe. Upon arriving at Joe's home, Danny discovered Joe busy training his racing horses and caring for his pets. After this significant family gathering, Joe revealed that Roy had called him the previous night, but Joe was in no mood to respond, still upset about Roy's troublesome behavior. Danny cringed at Joe's decision, feeling regretful. Danny thought maybe Roy was in trouble and required their help. After all, family is family, even if they occasionally drive you up the wall. So, what did Roy do? He made his way to Joe's place after the call went unanswered. Warm greetings from his niece and sister-in-law awaited him. With Danny already present, he encouraged Joe to patch things up as a family. However, Joe, who understood Roy well, wasn't willing to fall into that pattern again. Roy seemed to appear only when chaos was on the horizon. Making a dramatic exit, Roy chose to leave Joe's property. Before departing, he invited Danny to join him for a few days. Danny agreed, thinking a bit of time with Roy wouldn't hurt. Just before they left, Danny had some inquiries. Roy, it's time to spill the beans. During their journey, Roy explained his predicament. He was in deep trouble, tasked with safeguarding a highly valuable item. The twist? These valuables were a mob's prized possessions. So, Roy and his crew had to follow the mob's rules without any exceptions. Finally, Roy and Danny reached an underground fighting club run by Roy's acquaintance. The spotlight was on two powerful contenders, Barney Boy and the imposing Big Duke. Big Duke effortlessly defeated Barney Boy. Surprise, surprise. Roy took on Big Duke, a rematch from their past encounter where Roy had emerged victorious. The following day, Roy and Danny hit the road once again. Their destination? Collect valuable diamonds and transport them while keeping a low profile. When they arrived at the diamond storage facility, they were greeted by Paulie, Julian's right-hand man, who was tasked with guarding the stash. Paulie explained that the diamonds were cleverly concealed in beverage bottles to avoid detection. After a lengthy drive, Roy and Danny made a stop for refreshments and rest. Suddenly, a group of masked robbers burst in, wielding guns. Amid the chaos, a storekeeper lost his life. Roy and Danny found themselves in the middle of a diamond robbery, bullets flying around them. Roy reacted swiftly, fighting against the robbers. But their attempt was a big flop. Roy, with his fighter spirit, wasn't throwing in the towel. Alongside his brother, they hopped into a car swiped from a store parking lot and went full throttle after the thieves. Danny's suspicion alarm went off, so he asked Roy the burning question, what's in the cargo and who are these folks? Roy stayed tight-lipped, laser-focused on chasing the baddies. The sheer number of foes made Roy and Danny pump the brakes and halt the chase. Danny gave it another shot, asking Roy once more about the goods. Roy was out of evasive tactics, finally spilling the beans. They were hauling a load of diamonds worth around $50 million, owned by a fearsome mafia head. Later that night, Julian got word that Roy and the diamonds were MIA from their meetup spot. Julian boiled over, thinking Roy was playing tricks by swiping the jewels. Here's the twist. The diamond snatchers were actually Paulie's crew. They swiped the diamonds from Julian and pinned it on Roy and Danny. With their stolen car in tatters, Roy and Danny hoofed it to the city. Roy stressed the ticking clock. They had to recover the diamonds pronto to save Joe's wife and daughter from Julian's fury. We cut to Joe, back from groceries, only to find his family vanished. Julian had abducted them, using them as leverage. If Roy didn't complete his task, they'd pay the price. Roy and Danny finally reached a specific spot where they reached out to Joe, who was stunned by his family's sudden vanishing act. Roy put the blame on Julian, vowing to bring back Joe's loved ones ASAP. Roy dialed up Julian, giving him the lowdown on the real scoop. Julian, feeling betrayed, gave Roy an ultimatum. Bring back the diamonds in 48 hours, or Joe's family would pay with their lives. Furious, Danny initially stormed off, feeling deceived and their family's safety compromised. Eventually, he cooled down and rejoined Roy, determined to brainstorm a way out of the mess. I promise, I'm in for getting back at those mobsters, he declared, a determined expression etched on his face. Little did they realize, on the hill summit, two detectives, Johnson and Garcia, quietly observed their every move. These detectives were intently following Julian and his gang, investigating their illegal activities. Meanwhile, Joe wasn't idling around. He was on a mission to rescue his missing wife and daughter. Armed and prepared, he teamed up with Roy and Danny. Upon reaching where his siblings were, Joe's long-held emotions burst out, leading to an emotional confrontation with Roy. From a distance, Johnson and Garcia watched intently, eagerly awaiting the unfolding drama. On that very day, a photo arrived from Julian, showing Joe's captive family members. Without wasting time, Roy rallied his brothers, and they charged into Julian's stronghold to liberate Joe's loved ones. The following day, they confronted Julian, the mafia's leader, at his hideout. Leveraging his deadly military skills, Joe sprang into action, dispatching several guards. With the coast clear, Joe and Roy ventured inside to rescue the hostages, while Danny took on the role of a sharpshooter guarding from a distance. Yet, the chaos wasn't limited to the exterior. Inside the building, a showdown erupted between Paulie and Julian. Paulie eventually confessed to stealing the diamonds from Roy, driven by resentment towards Julian. Surprisingly, the diamond business was owned by Paulie's family, and he believed Julian, as an adopted son, wasn't fit to lead. Amidst the chaos outside, Julian capitalized on Paulie's distraction, knocking him out. Joe and Julian squared off, raising their weapons. Unexpectedly, they ran out of ammunition, leading them to engage in a bare-knuckle brawl. Julian's size gave him an upper hand, swiftly overpowering Joe. Just in the nick of time, Roy dashed to his brother's aid. He aimed a gun at Julian, but Julian's enraged shouts unnerved him. Seizing the opportunity amidst the confusion, Julian unleashed a brutal assault on Roy. Out of nowhere, Paulie, previously incapacitated, rose and unleashed a volley of gunfire at Joe and Julian, convinced he had taken them down. Believing Joe and Julian were defeated, Paulie ordered his men to capture Roy. Unbeknownst to him, Joe survived Paulie's shots, protected by his bulletproof vest. With communication lost, Danny bravely infiltrated the enemy's stronghold. There, he found Joe, surprisingly unharmed. Together, they raced to locate Paulie, who had kidnapped Roy. After a quick call, Danny reached out to his military buddy Jimmy for help in obtaining the necessary weapons to take down the mobsters. Now, let's shift our focus to Paulie, who has made his way to a heavily guarded location where Joe's wife and daughter are held captive. Paulie set up a high-stakes fight between Roy and his top fighter, with Joe's family's safety on the line. If Roy won, they'd be freed, but if he lost, their lives were at risk. Driven by the safety of his sister-in-law and niece, Roy had no choice but to step into the ring against Paulie's fighter. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Roy struggled to match his opponent's strength, enduring blow after punishing blow. Around the same time, Danny, Joe, and Jimmy arrived, having tracked Roy's location through his cell phone. From a distance, Danny, with his sniper skills, expertly took out Paulie's guards with precise headshot. Meanwhile, Roy continued his battle against his opponent. Eventually, he managed to overcome his rival, defeating Paulie's top fighter. Joe, Danny, and Jimmy worked together to eliminate Paulie's henchmen one by one. Ultimately, Joe successfully rescued his daughter and wife. He cornered Paulie, who was attempting to escape, but the police arrived in the nick of time, preventing Joe from taking the law into his own hands. Shortly after, FBI agents arrived, apprehending Paulie and dismantling his criminal empire. Agents Johnson and Garcia expressed their gratitude to Joe and his two brothers for their assistance in bringing down the criminals. As the story concluded, Joe and Roy's relationship was rekindled, and Roy decided to leave his fighting days behind. Instead, he planned to support Joe in caring for their family's ranch, marking a new chapter for the two brothers.